I'm Ralph Preston. William Lowe and I are back for another roadmap. And this week we had a request to talk about walking unassisted. There was no explanation about unassisted. It could mean it's something as simple. No, Ralph, don't use that word. Something like the first stage where rehab hospital typically, or a PT typically helps you get up and out of the wheelchair. Roadmap's mostly about dealing with stuff after insurance and at home and on your own. And most people aren't happy with that level of walking unassisted because they'd like to walk unassisted without the frame walker, rollator, quad cane, single point cane, whatever they're using. So we're mostly going to focus on that tonight. And a couple of things that you might think about as you make that transition in terms of looking at it and improving your gait, which will also help you walk unassisted. So, William, I know you got a couple of points that we talked about earlier. So, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, sure thing, Ralph. So when it comes to walking unassisted after stroke, I think it's a lot. I mean, a lot of people say that it's quite hard. And while this is somewhat true, I think that with the right approach and with the right mindset going into recovery after stroke, it's actually quite achievable. And once you get the hang of it, and once you expose your brain to actually what it feels like to actually teach teach your affected leg to bear the weight of your body like it used to before your stroke, it's actually a lot easier to connect the dots, and it becomes quite intuitive to learn how to walk by yourself. So when it comes to learning how to relearn how to walk independently after your stroke, a lot of this really comes down to your ability to teach your affected side to bear the weight of your body. Now, typically after stroke, the reason why walking tends to come back first is because some of the muscles, which are responsible for your walking, they're 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 shared across both sides of your brain. So our brain obviously has two hemispheres, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And so when it comes to walking in recovery after stroke, the reason why walking comes back quicker is because your affected leg tends to use the non-affected leg as a reference point, which is why some people hobble in the first days of stroke, because they're using their stronger leg to sort of do most of the walking, and then as a result of that, their affected leg is able to pick up from that, and they're able to get the ball rolling in their recovery and learn how to, I guess, take the first steps in their recovery after stroke. Now, having said that, when it comes to relearning how to walk again, the quicker you can teach your brain how to experience what it feels like to put more weight on your affected side, then the quicker and more likely you're able to reach a point where you're going to become more independent in your walking. And the easiest way to do this is to obviously do exercises which encourage your brain to put a lot more weight on that affected side of your leg. Now, typically, when you get therapy from insurance, if you're the typical stroke survivor, you probably would have experienced something which is called knee hyperextension, which is basically where you're in a situation where whenever you walk, you're at an increased risk of falling, because every time you want to put down your leg, or every time you want to try and bend your leg like you typically would before you had your stroke, it suddenly wants to snap back. And when it snaps back, that actually stops your brain from being able to bear the weight through that leg, because that knee actually doesn't buckle and it's not able to support the weight as it transitions from your non-affected leg to your affected leg. Because if you remember anything about how you used to walk before your stroke, each leg would basically bear the weight of your body, and as the weight would transition from one leg to the other, each knee of each leg would bend a little bit, but they would just stop at the point just before they were completely straight, in order to actually transition to the other leg afterwards. So one of the key ways to actually make this happen quicker is obviously through exercises such as your squats or your sit to stands, as I like to call them. And the reason why squats are so good is because when you're doing a squat, when you're standing up from a chair, and also when you're sitting down, is you are actually teaching your brain how to put weight through both of your legs in order to support the weight of your body as you stand up. And by doing this, this actually strengthens up a lot of the muscles which are used to support the weight of your body whenever you're walking, and allow you to I guess get into more of a rhythm whenever you're walking. So that's the first exercise, I think, which is crucial in recovery after stroke. But where it goes very wrong for a lot of stroke survivors is that when they're taught this in hospital, when they get therapy through insurance, sometimes the therapist would just ask you to just try standing up and sitting down. And because a stroke survivor is so used to relying on their non-affected leg all the time, their brain will have a preference of relying mainly on the stronger leg to do a lot of the standing and a lot of the weight bearing when they stand up. So quite often, a lot of stroke survivors, when they do a squat in the early days of their recovery after stroke, they won't be leaning towards their affected side whenever they're standing up, but they will be leaning more towards their stronger side when they stand up. And for all those folks who are watching this, I would encourage you, if you're open to trying it, if you could try standing up from your chair, or just standing, or just sitting down and standing up from wherever you're watching this, and you might notice that if your brain has developed a preference for relying mainly on your stronger side or your non-affected side, you might notice that when you stand up, your brain will instinctively lean more towards your stronger side in order to stand up, rather than leaning more towards your affected side when you stand up. And this is what I would say is the number one culprit behind why it's so hard to get off the walking stick. Because for several reasons. Well, the first reason is because a walking cane essentially gives your brain a crux to rely on to return to walking, because your brain is using something to support the weight of the body in order to actually stand up. And basically, a cane is more or less the same as a third leg. So if you're already relying on your stronger leg to support most of the weight of your body when you stand up, if you add in the cane and you're relying mainly on the cane, then you're not really teaching your brain how to strengthen up your affected leg and strengthen up some of those muscles in your affected leg to bear the weight of your body, so that you can actually walk independently and allow both of your legs to bear equal amounts of weight as you progress to a place where you're able to walk independently, with each leg bearing equal amounts of weight at the same time. So that's the number one thing I would address, and I think that's something which really stops a lot of stroke survivors. And if you're serious, if you're at all serious about returning back to walking, and if you're in a situation where maybe you're a little bit further down the line in your recovery after stroke, and you were never shown and you weren't given a lot of support in your recovery, I would encourage you to think about this idea of, I guess, giving your brain the experience of what it feels like to put weight through both of your legs whenever you walk, and how this might benefit your recovery after stroke. Now, Ralph, earlier before we start this roadmap, we've had conversations in the past about the importance of making sure that you teach your brain to put a lot more weight on the affected leg. And I know you've had a lot of experience with this, being as obsessed about stroke recovery as myself, as well as just things which you've observed because you developed an intuitive sense of how recovery after stroke works. I was just wondering if you wanted to share some of these thoughts with the folks watching.
Sure. got several on this, and you brought up some good points. My experience personally was I did the quick step shuffle, like most people do, trying to keep weight off that affected leg. And if you ever did that or watch somebody do it, you'll notice that the one thing they don't do, and this will be something we'll talk about in a minute, is bring that the unaffected foot very far forward. In order to get the weight off, they typically they put the affected foot down as quickly as they can. They move the other one up, and they don't advance it. And then they take another step with where they do advance it. We'll talk about some ideas for getting over that in a minute. But what I found in working with, well, both myself and other people was you really can't do too much weight bearing. So I did a lot of weight bearing at the counter. I also did, there's other ways to get your, when you do weight bearing on your affected leg, it tells your brain to want to use that leg. And so that's a good thing for that reason. I did standing on my affected leg only. I did lots of squats. I also did squats on my affected leg only. No, those aren't real easy. And even with all that, I didn't get to a perfect gait, or well, I don't have perfect gait now, or I didn't get to the gait that I'm at now right away, because my experience, people still have issues with that almost no matter how far they are along. And typically they definitely have issues with it if they haven't resolved it before they get released from PT. Not that a physical therapist is any better at directing you than you directing yourself if you've got some knowledge. But so this is a problem for everybody. So I would suggest, weight bearing. Oh, another thing I did was weight shifting. Got something you hold on to. You don't hold on to it because you want to also work on your balance. If you want to walk unassisted without any canes or walkers or anything, you got to have pretty decent balance before you even get to the cane, let alone when you drop it. So weight shifting is good. You have something in front of you like the counter. You don't necessarily grab on it, and you just shift your weight back and forth from one leg to the other. You can even lift the legs up when you get good at it off the floor. You lift a leg off the floor, your unaffected leg off the floor. That means all your weight's on your affected side, which I think is a good thing. Let's see, what else have I noticed in working with people? Almost everybody that I've tried to, get off of a cane. I've done it mostly with a gait belt. That's not practical for a lot of people because I know how to walk somebody in a gait belt, and I was volunteering to help other people. Most people don't have somebody like that in their life, and somebody in their family or whatever may or may not be willing to try walking somebody with a gait belt. If you're a 100-pound woman, you probably don't want to walk your 200-pound husband. So there's a lot of practicalities. The gait belt works good, but you need a lot of time. Fear of falling is a big thing that holds people back. But everybody that I've worked with, no matter what level, they still were doing some variation of that quick step shuffle, in the sense that they don't bring that foot beyond the affected foot. So one of the simplest things, I know, William, you've got some other techniques. One of the simplest things that I would do would be point it out and try and tell them. No, I might also point this out before they're trying to transition. It seems to not be something that people solve. Often we worked on it before they transitioned and after they transitioned, because it takes a while. Retraining the brain is typically these people have walked that way for a year or more. The last guy on the gait belt, when he got him off the frame walker, took a year. So he was like 2.5 years out. So he'd been repeating this pattern for a long time. So to break a pattern you repeated for a long time takes a long time to overwrite one with the other. So one simple trick I do is I start telling people, okay, with that, take that unaffected foot, and instead of putting it even with your other sneaker, try and go halfway. So the point of the toe of the affected foot is, well, when you put your unaffected foot down, the middle of the sneaker, your arch is even with the toe. When I can get them doing that and thinking about it, because what happens, a lot, if I don't point it out, say, watch that foot, people's brains automatically go back to, William, this is something you and I've discussed. The brains go right back to the old pattern if you don't think about it. But after I got them thinking about it pretty good and doing halfway, then I suggest going where you put your heel on your unaffected foot, your better, stronger foot, even with the toe. Now you're at least about a foot from where you started, and which was toes even. Then if they get that, then what I do is I start looking at how many inches they put the unaffected foot past, because if they only put they're still taking small steps, but they're even, they work on lengthening both sides. But typically what you find is they put that the affected foot, another half a sneaker or even a whole sneaker beyond that one. So you want to get that one doing that. So the distance between the toe and the heel on each side is the same. That'll mean your gait's kind of even. So that was kind of long-winded, but it's kind of complicated. Quickly, before I toss it back to you, one other thing you can do is you can use things like if you do bridges with a ball or a towel or a bike helmet or something between your knees, that kind of makes the weight more evenly distributed. I'm not saying it's perfect 50-50, but it gets it away from 90-10, which is the way it is if you don't put something between your knees. There are other things you can do with TheraBands on sit-to-stands that are more complicated. But what you want to do is, like William said in the beginning, get weight on that foot and build it up. Get your brain used to standing on it. Get your brain used to thinking about it. Get your brain used to thinking about how far you're taking your steps. So I'll toss it back to you now, William.
Yeah, great. So I mean, I just wanted to stop and just highlight everything that Ralph said, especially with what he observed with how a lot of stroke survivors he's worked with, and a lot of stroke survivors he's seen. Whenever they walk, they don't lift up their affected leg or their affected foot to catch up with their non-affected foot. And this is something I just want to emphasize and underline, because I think it's this only really occurs because your brain is so used to using your stronger leg to actually get most of the walking done. So with a lot of stroke survivors I've talked to, I've also seen this with survivors who I personally coached, and they describe it to me in a very similar way, where whenever they walk and they plant down their foot with their stronger leg or their non-affected leg, they almost spend a lot of time. They almost use their stronger leg or non-affected leg as an anchor to prepare themselves in order to lift up their affected leg to actually catch up. And what this results in for a lot of stroke survivors, and I'm just going to use an example from one stroke survivor who said to me, is that they mentioned to me that whenever they walk and whenever they plant their stronger leg forward or their non-affected leg forward, what tends to happen is that their fight or flight mechanism kicks in, and they have to use their stronger leg to stabilize and amp themselves up in order to actually lift up their affected leg to bring it forward so that it's in line or at least close to their non-affected foot. And that's why that that's why that phenomenon happens. It's mainly because your brain has been conditioned to rely mainly on the stronger leg or the non-affected leg to do most of the walking or most of the weight bearing in your recovery after stroke. And obviously, to get to an ideal situation where both of your legs are supporting equal amounts of weight, or in other words, get towards a situation where you're walking with more of a rhythm, then what you have to do is you have to train the brain to learn how to put a lot more weight through that affected leg, so that, as Ralph said, you are not in a situation where your stronger leg is taking on 90% of the body weight, and your affected leg is taking on 10% of the body weight, but rather they're both taking on 50% of your body weight. And this will result in a situation where you're able to walk without having to use one leg as an anchor to stabilize the weight of the other leg or stabilize the weight of your body as it transitions from one leg over to the other, but rather a situation where you're able to plant one foot in front of the other effortlessly, and it doesn't feel like that one leg is taking on more weight than the other. Now, given the symptoms of stroke recovery, your stronger leg is obviously always going to be a lot stronger than your affected leg. But that doesn't mean that you can't train up your affected leg to become as strong as your non-affected leg at all. And as Ralph said, a lot of this really comes down to weight-bearing exercises. I'm a big advocate of bridging exercises. Bridging with the ball is something which I've suggested to survivors I've coached in the past. It's a really effective exercise, not just for your walking, but also for muscles which are called your pelvic floor muscles. Just one of the survivors I coached recently, they used this exercise, and they found that it actually stopped them from being able to. I mean, sometimes they would find that going to the toilet would be an issue for them, but obviously by doing these bridging exercises, they train up these muscles called pelvic floor muscles, which obviously allowed them to get control of that, and it improved their quality of life at the same time. But that's another topic anyway. So bridging exercises are great. Another exercise I would suggest is just going back to basics and just doing your stairs and just going up and down stairs, because usually when it comes to stairs, if you're receiving therapy through insurance, most of the time your therapist would suggest that you go up with your stronger leg. And the reason being is because they obviously don't want you to fall in hospital, and obviously because it also allows you to it is that. Well, in the early days of stroke, if you go upstairs with your stronger leg, it means that you're a lot more safe and you're not going to fall. But it also means that you're teaching and conditioning your brain to rely on the stronger leg to go upstairs for the rest of your life, or lead with the stronger leg for the rest of your life, rather than attempting to put some attention towards your affected leg and try to lead with your affected leg when you're going upstairs. And I think that's particularly important, because with stairs, whichever leg you lead with is the leg which is doing most of the work. So if you could just do something as simple as just purchase a stepper at home, or if you happen to live near some stairs, going up some stairs, holding onto the rail, and just going up one step with your affected leg and coming back down, that will be enough to condition and teach your brain how to put a lot more weight on your affected foot or on your affected leg, so that you can strengthen up some of those muscles which are responsible for bearing the weight of your body. And this in turn, obviously done in combination with something like bridging, that can improve your walking. And from what I've heard from stroke survivors, they find that they walk with a little bit more of a rhythm after doing things such as bridging, and also doing exercises like going upstairs, but making a conscious effort of leading with their affected leg rather than their stronger leg. Now, having said that, Ralph, you mentioned something about mentioned something about shifting your weight side to side, and I'm a big advocate of this idea, and I think that when it comes to recovery after stroke, especially walking, a lot of stroke survivors, they get into this tricky situation where, especially if they've been conditioned to rely mainly on their stronger leg, whenever they walk, they kind of walk side to side, kind of like a penguin. In other words, what tends to happen is that they would take one step forward with their stronger leg, and they will waddle all the way to one side, and then they'll hold it there for a second, and then they'll waddle all the way back to the other side when they're lifting up their affected leg. So an easy way to, I mean, unless you want to walk like this for the rest of your life, an easy way to address this is obviously going back to the drawing board and teaching your brain how to put a lot more weight on your affected leg so that when you're walking, you're not waddling side to side, but rather everything is symmetrical. And you might be waddling a little bit, but you're not drifting too far from the midline of your body. So one really cool exercise, which I thought of in my recovery after stroke in the early days, was something as simple as what I like to call step training. And what step training is it's basically teaching and conditioning your brain to lead with your affected leg or lead with your affected foot when it comes to walking after stroke. So one of the things which I found useful in my own recovery and also with stroke survivors who I personally coached is by setting up something in your home so that you can encourage your brain to lead with the affected leg whenever you take that first step. Now, we know that your non-affected leg, it's always going to be good and it's going to take care of itself. But in terms of recovery after stroke, what we need to do is re-educate your brain on how to take that first step or lead with the affected leg. And one thing I found beneficial was just getting some electrical tape and stick it on the ground about a third of the yard in front of you and marking a spot or a target which you want your affected leg or affected foot to touch whenever you're taking the first step. So, for example, you could be doing this while you're standing behind a door frame. And what you could do is you could place some electrical tape about a third of a yard in front of you, which I believe is 12 inches. Well, not 12 inches, maybe 18 inches in front of you. And what you could do is you could aim to plant your affected leg forward and also bend your knee at the first time. So what you'll be doing, and I hope I'm describing this correctly, is you'll be doing a sort of a half lunge, but you're not coming down all the way to the ground. You're only coming about a third of the way down to the ground. So you'll be leading with your affected leg foot first, bending your knee once you touch the electrical tape, and then you would bring it back behind the door frame where you first started. And what this does is this actually conditions and it trains your brain how to lead with the affected leg whenever you're walking. And in turn, what you're doing is you're teaching your brain how to strengthen up the affected leg and teach your brain how to get that affected leg to bear the weight to your body a lot more compared to your non-affected leg. Because like I said, the non-affected leg is always going to take care of itself. And if you can get both working in tandem, then it's going to allow your brain to connect the dots a lot easier. So that was a long piece by myself, and I shared a lot of really cool exercises. And Ralph, I know you've had experience with some of the exercises which I shared. So before I toss back to you, just wondering if you want to share your thoughts on some of these and how you believe that these could help someone return to walking or improve their walking after a stroke.
Well, yeah, because I made about 8 notes while you were talking. I'll try and do this briefly so we don't go on forever. Well, I definitely walked up the stairs both ways, leading with 1 foot one way, 1 foot the other way. 1 foot one time, 1 foot the next time. Same with coming back down, leading with different feet. After I got pretty good at that, I actually, okay, I'm gonna jump around a little bit here. you're talking about legs not being as strong as, in some ways, my affected leg isn't as strong. In some ways, like pushing up from standing up, ever since I could stand up, I've been pushing up using the tripod method off the ground. I've been pushing up with my affected leg just for that reason, to try and even them out. Also, actually, right there, coming up the steps, I practiced walking across my backyard, going up 3 steps, coming over and taking the 2 steps into the house. And I practiced doing it like, well, I had to think about it in order to learn how to not think about it. Now, that sounds crazy, but eventually it worked. So what I'd do would be I would lead with whatever foot would be next, rather than a lot of stroke survivors end up doing like taking a little half a step so they can lead with the one they're used to. I untrained myself to do that, and actually at this point I don't really think about it, except I notice I typically lead with my unaffected leg when I come down this little teeny step into the sunroom. But out there in most steps, I just train myself to just go with whatever's working. Yeah, let's see what else got. You talked about electrical tape. You know, one of the things the way you were describing it's great. It gets you to lead with that unaffected foot. I've also used tape in terms of getting people's step even, because you can like watch them and you set electrical or gaffer tape or duct tape and put it every 18 inches or 2 feet. Well, if you take an 18-inch step, that's a 3-foot stride. That would be pretty big. Most people take a stride around 2.5 feet. So you can put electrical tape every 15 inches or so. And then the next foot should land on that. That'll help even out the top problem issue I was talking about before, where people play catch up with that foot with the unaffected foot long after they don't need to do that because their brain got trained that way. Let's see. Yeah, I think people walk like penguins somewhat when they get told not to circumduct, not to swing that leg again. So they'll lean to one side. A lot of people, when they get use a hemi walker, I'm not a big fan of them. Well, of course, they're necessary when people don't have a functioning hand. But as soon as you can get off of one, I think the better, because they tend to make you lean a bunch too, and you got to untrain that lean. Okay, the one other thing that I wanted to thought of during that when you were talking, William, is that people don't do, and this contributes to not being able to weight bear, not having even steps, is they might start working the affected foot where they come down on their heel, and they might do better heel toe pronation, well, certainly than they ever did if they had an AFO or when they were starting out, because that's a weak thing. But even when you get towards walking decently, I see a lot of people don't push off much with their toe. One exercise you can do is basically what William was saying. You can lead with that affected foot, and instead of taking it back, you want something to hang on to, a chair in that doorway or something. You can put the other foot forward and push off that toe. It's called a roll off by some people. I have a video by that name on my YouTube channel where I demonstrate it. So I think in my observation and with myself, I notice that people don't do a very good push off, even if they're starting to do a heel strike and roll through. Don't have any power in the push off, and you walk forward a lot with your toes, in the sense, you know, your toes are the last thing to have contact. So having to have an even gait, you have to have kind of an even push off, which means you have to strengthen up that push off. One thing you can do is it's basically a heel raise. So you can do heel raises if or affected only leg heel raises. Good luck with them. They're hard to do more than about 10 of them, no matter how good you are, or unless you're better than me. Anyway, not better, able to. So that's something else to work on in terms of lengthening your step, in terms of fine tuning your gait. We're not symmetrical, perfectly symmetrical, but we're more symmetrical before our strokes than after. And you're trying to get back to that, how do I say this, that non-symmetrical pre-stroke symmetry that you had, rather than the peg leg shuffle and the lack of push off with the toe. If you don't do a good heel strike and roll through, if you walk flat footed, or you're not going to have much push off, and you really need to build up those your gastrocs, your calf muscles do a lot of that pushing, I believe. And so heel raises are one good way. If you have access to a pool, I found I could do a lot of affected leg only heel raises in the pool where you got some buoyancy, because it takes some of the weight off of it. I could do 50 of them, and I can't do. It was hard for me to do 10 on the land. And if you can do 50, even if they're easier, you're patterning yourself and you're going through the range of motion and you're training your brain. I found that was also true of the single leg squats. I could only do 10 of them on the land. I can do 50 of them in the water. I also did a really shallow version of that to work on hyperextension, so you could learn just work real smoothly in that last couple of degrees. And so you learn how to pull your knee back far enough, but not pull it all the way back to where you hyperextend. So we could probably talk about this for a couple hours. We thought it might be a simpler, a quicker, simpler subject than it turned out to be. But I'll ask you, William, you got anything else you want to add?
No, I don't. I mean, I just hope for all the folks watching this, really, really take to heart a lot of the ideas and a lot of the concepts which Ralph and I shared in this roadmap, because I think when you have, like I said at the beginning, when you can think about walking and not overcomplicate it in your recovery after stroke, and just think about how your brain actually walks and how it sends the signals through those legs to actually bear the weight of your body, it actually becomes a lot easier to understand how to actually make things happen in your recovery after stroke. And I think that's what roadmap is all about. It's about giving stroke survivors the tools they need to support them in their recovery, especially when insurance ends, because when your insurance finishes and you have no more therapy and you don't know where to go to, it's hard to figure out things by yourself. And Ralph and I, we've traveled this journey, and we've thought a lot about recovery after stroke. And these are things which we're sharing with all of you who are watching, which can hopefully help you shortcut your recovery, maybe give you the self-confidence to let you know that, recovery is possible, that it is possible to make things happen in your recovery. And it's not as hard as it seems. So that's the only thing I have to add. Keep an open mind. Try out some of these exercises. Some of these exercises might be really suitable for you, and some might not be, depending on where you are in your stage of journey. But what I can say is that no matter where you are in your journey, these exercises will be beneficial no matter the case.
Okay, well, I guess we should sign off. One thing I'll say before we do, if you're watching this video and you got questions and such, that's what the comments below the video are for. I know people have questions. I don't seem to ask them. Sometimes I put the videos I refer to. So if you have, and sometimes I don't. So if you have any trouble finding the video on roll-offs, or I got them on weight shifting, weight bearing, balancing on your affected leg, affected leg only heel raises. They're all in the Walking Better playlist. So look for that, and you find most of these. If you have any issues or any questions, ask. I answer everything that people write in the comments. So, William, thank you as always for your time. And to everybody out there, we'll see you next time on Roadmap.
No problem. Thanks, Ralph. It's great to be with you again.